we have a new system as creatives, and even just generally in the world. The world is literally born again, especially for us in Nigeria. We are having the opportunity to go from having Africa Magic to Netflix Africa, and Iroko TV and Instagram, YouTube. There's the dynamics have changed. But what I'm noticing isn't changing is people's approach to their work. And that's step number one.
This is Bantu, the African Creative Podcast. Hey, welcome back to Bantu, the African Creative Podcast. I'm Adetunji Paul. This is episode 3 of our current season, and the response so far has been absolutely amazing. I didn't expect this number of plays, but the response and the support that we've gotten from the creative community so far has been absolutely incredible, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Our guest this week is Funfere Koroye. He is a design engineer and product developer. He leads Nupe Project, a hardware design and innovation company based in Lagos and London. In this episode, we talk about his journey, the impact of Nigerian media, and how to navigate the new world as an African creative. Welcome, Funfere.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the intro.
Great. So I think the first thing I would like to hear about from you is, where did you grow up?
So my growing up story is primarily in and around Nigeria. I was born in northern Nigeria, actually, in the north, in Kano State. Lived there very briefly. So me and my sister were born there. But we lived there for about 2-3 years. I don't think more. And then there was some sort of, religious unrest that made my parents, reconsider the decision to live in the north. They are originally from the Niger Delta, from Bayelsa. So They moved there for greener pastures, I guess. Back in the late 80s, Kano State was actually a hub for the banking industry.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And was there much of a creative influence in your life when you were living in Kano?
I don't think so. I barely remember those formative years. But from Kano State, we moved to Lagos State. So I think Lagos State has more of the influence on sort of my creative mindset. I grew up, I think, in Lagos for the next, give or take, I would say 13 years. Yeah.
Right.
13, 14 years. Yeah.
Right. So which means you must have done secondary school in Lagos.
Yes. So I did the primary, secondary, up until, I guess, the foundation year for uni. So before realizing that, what I wanted to ultimately major in couldn't happen in Nigeria. Funny enough, believe it or not, I was actually planning to go to a Nigerian university. But I saw that the industrial design engineering curriculum in Nigerian universities weren't as solid as I wanted. And the internet age took off in Nigeria, when I was 14 or 15. And right. I think that helped to shape my decisions in terms of what I wanted to do for a living and how I wanted to go about it.
Would you be able to tell me a little bit about how you found out about industrial design in the first place and why you wanted to study it as a bachelor's degree?
So found out about it by accident, truthfully. My original course of study, when you're in your final year of secondary school, in Nigeria, it's pretty typical to have career days and, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? Because you have to start taking your WAEC or your SATs or your IGCSEs to focus in that path. And for the most part, as Nigerian youth, we are forced to pick degrees. And these degrees are along the lines of either what our parents want us to do or what we think we're supposed to do, which is doctor, lawyer, banker, and then I guess oil and gas. These were the 4 sort of top things everybody wanted to do. And if you were lucky, like me and other people who figured out some kind of talent, you would have a minor in something. So if you say, oh, you love to cook, then you would major in medicine, which you are being forced to do, and minor in, some kind of cooking degree, which, as our parents used to call it back then, your hobby.
Right.
If you wanted to be a musician, you definitely couldn't be a musician first. You had to be a lawyer first. Then music would be on the side. So similar thing for me. I knew I wanted to do something that intersected design and engineering, but there were no industrial designers before my generation that are Nigerian, that are famous enough for even me to know this term, industrial design or product design.
Right.
All I knew was Da Vinci. Da Vinci popularly is known as the painter of the Mona Lisa, but if you know more about Da Vinci, you know that he was an engineer.
Yeah.
He was a all-round creative, a Renaissance man. I think that term is really Da Vinci's nickname, because he dissected cadavers to see how the human body worked. He designed planes before even planes were ever thought about.
True.
There's so many things he did. And so that's how I figured in the beginning, my calling. I said, oh, I want to be like Da Vinci. I paint, I draw, I design. I am very interested in how things work. I used to take apart my toys. So my parents would always say they knew from a young age that mechanical engineering was the thing I was to do. And then art was my hobby. Right. So that's how I started. Mechanical engineer as the main degree, art as the minor. But like I said, as you would have it, the internet came to Nigeria when I was 13, which is pretty late, because most people in the US and UK and pretty much everywhere else in the world had the internet way before that.
True.
But we just got it, and in its very primitive form as dial-up.
Yeah.
So I started to do Google searches. They would encourage us at school, use the internet. The internet or computer started to slowly replace books in the library. So the library went from being a place full of books to being a place filled with some books and then a lot of computers.
Yeah.
And they taught us what Google was, for the first time, like, oh, search anything, it comes up. And, that was crazy for me, because you would have to read 10 books sometimes to get one piece of information.
Yeah.
But with Google and Ask Jeeves and all these other MSN and everything, you would type one thing and get 1,000 links. So I typed in car design one day, just curious. I'm like, car design. I typed in shoe design. I typed in just everything design and just started to see everything was going back to this one degree. And primarily also to this one software called Rhino. I started to learn about Rhino, started to understand how Rhino worked, kind of who that used Rhino.
Right.
And then from there, started to Google industrial design courses, university. You know how Googling works. It was very archaic when you first got to it.
Yeah.
You just put in these keywords and things popped up. So I started to see universities that have been around for 50 years, some even close to 100 years, that offered these design courses. And I became hooked instantly. I think it wasn't a mistake that I came across this resource. And that's why I put my foot down and said, this is actually what I want to study. I do not want to separate my career into two, a major and a minor. Like, I wanted to have a fusion of two.
So essentially you plotted your own course.
I know I'm making it sound easy now, but it was actually a year plus of fighting and arguing and squabbling with my father. But this was the very difficult.
This is the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Path that led to this outcome.
This is most interesting. And so you've been all over the world, really, but I'd like to start at the top. You left Nigeria for the first time to study at Academy of Art University. Is that correct?
Correct. First time.
What was that like, and what did you learn there?
So the Academy of Art, I was there for just a year. I actually went there to study car design. It was if I'm to be honest, it was a naive decision, but also I don't think there's any experience that's a bad experience. Every experience, you learn something. So I went to the Academy of Arts, San Francisco, California. First time in my life traveling to the US. And I went to California, San Francisco. I'm 17 years old. It was a culture shock. It was overwhelming. I learned very quickly that I specified my major too quickly. Yes, I was enthusiastic, but I was not catching up as quickly as I should have, because a lot of these people before 17 had already honed their skills. Like they were in an environment that was supporting them from 10 years old to be this thing. I just sort of figured out this is what I wanted to do. So it was a huge learning curve for me, because it's the first time I was using a computer like that, and these softwares and these tools. I was literally in a workshop learning how to spray paint, how to weld, and these are,
you can't buy that.
The school made it seem like, yeah, come and learn. But honestly, when you're being graded on what you are learning, then it's almost like you should know how to do it before you start doing it in school, So, I learned a lot of lessons from that first year, and even things that I would apply to even, when I have my own kids, in terms of making decisions and having sort of prerequisite skills before going after something. But yeah, that first year was a learning curve for me in that degree, in, the industrial design engineering degree. And
right.
I was there for just a year because I felt the course was too specific for me and I needed a different environment to focus.
Right. So you learned hard skills and you learned soft skills there.
Correct. Yeah.
A lot of things that you're going to carry into your life and your children. Does that mean that you made a decision to leave Academy of Art University in San Francisco?
Yes, I did. After a year.
Where did you go after that?
So I went to the Savannah College of Arts and Design, famously known as SCAD. It's just outside of Atlanta. Savannah is not a very popular place. Most people know it as where Forrest Gump was shot. Some of the scenes in Forrest Gump. And it's a really sort of quiet, suburby city. And SCAD actually owns most of the buildings in the city because, like I said, it's just outside Atlanta. And, it was a perfect place for a university to be set up to not be too distracting from sort of the hustle and bustle from a major city. So I looked it up. I did my research. Quite a number of very notable people have graduated from there. So yeah, I gave it a shot. I applied with my portfolio after a year. I got in, and that therein began the real journey.
The real journey.
Yes.
You had this project that I heard about, and I don't know if this was through Behance, but I'll just say it was on the internet. You called it Fusion Kevlar. Was Fusion Kevlar going on in the days of SCAD?
Yeah, so it actually was. That was formed in the very first year of me being in SCAD. So I would always say that one thing I like about going to school in the US is professors teach for real world applications. They don't teach too much theory. So this is what the professor did in the first day of class in one of my classes. He said, come up with a brand name, make a logo for this brand, open a blog for this brand, have an email address for this brand, because you'll be using it for the rest of this class, because this class was for a year. So in this class, essentially, you would come up with a product you were passionate about. He taught us how to use Alibaba. This is when Alibaba was literally in its infancy, and only people that did what I did used Alibaba. And, he said, use this email address, talk to people in China, show them your product design, show them your tech pack, show them, get some quotes on how stuff is. essentially just understand how things are made from A to Z, because it's your job and this is what you will make an earning off of. So that's how that name came about. And it then, transformed into something else eventually later down the line. But yeah, it started off as a class project to name a brand.
That is a serious backstory.
Yeah.
And I used to see like really crazy shoes. And just for our listeners, would you give us a description of the kind of really amazing work that we would see you post on Fusion Kevlar?
Okay, so it started off as a Tumblr. Unfortunately, Tumblr is not as fantastic as it was when it first came out. But essentially, I would put out really sorts of avant-garde sneaker product design. So my brand was sort of like a African version of Nike. That was sort of the vision I had, and I had all these African inspired, not just by print, but also by weather, by terrain, by culture, and infused it into shoes, bags, even things like jackets, bodysuits, running gear, stuff like that, that kind of stuff. And then eventually, funny enough, that actually started to dictate the way I dressed. So the blog ended up being sort of a mix between my work and like my style, my aesthetic, things that I liked. That sort of put me in the middle of the work I do, and then also how I sort of started to interact with people all over the world on the web space.
And this was really an important stage for you, because after running Fusion Kevlar for a bit, these designs, they were trending everywhere. I remember seeing this, I think it was a green shoe, and it had a really interesting African print on it. And I thought maybe this could exist. Maybe we could buy this somewhere. You left the US and you went to Milan to study at the Remus. How did you make that jump, and why?
So at the end of my time in the US, again, my whole life is just a bunch of lessons. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in the US, an intern, because typically, after school, the next thing is an internship and then sort of find your way in the world. But, I was being advised to sort of just jump straight into my master's so that I wouldn't feel like I didn't want to do it afterwards. So I think I took advice from my parents to just jump right into my master's, something I wish I didn't do, if I'm being totally honest.
Really?
I wish I had stayed in the US and continued down the path I was on. I decided to do my master's in Italy for two reasons. Like I said, I started to find my focus more and more the closer I got to graduation. And at graduation, two things piqued my interest. One was designing for sustainability, and then the other was product design for fast-moving commercial goods. And I just saw Italy as the place for that. Italians are very famous for homeware and leather goods. But also what Italians are famous for is their automobile industry. Italians are famous for designing lighting, furniture, food and beverage, utensils. I mean, the list is long.
Really long.
The list is very long. So to me, the Italians were the perfect intersection, once again, of design and engineering. What I think I learned from the Americans is how to do business, how to, it's a place where you can literally have any idea and find the market. And I felt like I needed to sort of finesse the skills, and have that Italian, like really go to where Da Vinci is from and understand how Italians are, who they are. So that's why I made that move to Milan and ultimately to the Domus Academy. And funny enough, I think it was in Italy that I actually realized that I wanted to start designing sneakers and footwear.
This was an important turning point, wasn't it?
Yes, very important, because people had always sort of inferred it, but I never really took it seriously, because as an industrial designer, as a degree, was more mechanical engineering based. So, like I said, what we had as industrial design was a lot to pick from. So some people specified really from week one of school. They knew they wanted to be sneaker designers. I didn't know what I wanted to be. All I knew was I wanted to solve problems. So I just kept it broad. Even my final project, it's funny, my final project in school for my dissertation was based around clean energy. It was received really well. So I felt like even I was still sort of trying to go down that path. But when I had to do my master's, like we said, I had another turning point again.
And in some ways, all of these experiences, they merged, they converged, and I can certainly relate to taking paths that you may not have chosen for yourself. Typical examples would be, things like what you wanted to study and maybe places you would not have worked or would have stayed in and such and such. So you go from being at Domus to running a business, and there is a lot of press, I would say, that came about. You were still, as far as we know, a pretty prominent figure, because you were the only African industrial designer who was visible. So it comes to the point where we ask you about Nupe Project and how Nupe Project was born. There must have been, I imagine, a set of conditions that brought this to be.
Okay, so I think just quickly, I would say post the Domus Academy, what happened and what led to the Nupe Project. So post the Domus Academy, one of the conditions for my master's was to pick in Italy. It's typically school is more than just classrooms. There's a sort of a master and apprentice type system in Italy. So you would learn directly from people in the field you wanted to specify in. So I ended up choosing a master shoemaker in Florence, Italy, as my master. So I was his apprentice for a year, and I learned how shoes were made, the whole entire process, A to Z. So really, that's why I fell in love with the idea that I wanted to work in the footwear industry as sort of my entrance into my career. I got a job with a Japanese-American brand who manufactured in China. So I moved to China after Italy, and I worked in China for about a year plus with that company. And then pretty much after that, I was for the next 9 years working for people. More popularly, one of the jobs I had was I was working for Techno Mobile. So Techno makes mobile phones and mobile accessories. So I was working for their parent organization in Nigeria. And I also was based in Shenzhen in China. And I mean, they had so many brands under the umbrella of the parent company. And during that time, so I was doing freelance work. I did a lot of 9-to-5s. In fact, funny enough, a lot of people don't know this, is I've practically worked 9-to-5 my entire life.
Really?
Yeah, for 10 years, worked 9-to-5. I just prefer to put out more of my personal passion projects publicly than my day-to-day. One of the more interesting jobs I actually had was I worked as a teaching assistant in a secondary school in Nigeria. Yeah. So I think I've pretty much done just about any job to gain a new skill set in my path. as I would like to call it, which then led me to realizing that, okay, there was this small gap in the market because more and more Africans in Africa and diaspora needed a bridge between their products and how to manufacture them. So more and more people were discovering Alibaba. More and more people were discovering, that China was a resource, not just for ordering things, but also a place where you could develop your products from scratch. I found this sweet spot, at the point and thought, let me fill it and let me, try to charge for my services as not just a freelancer, but under the umbrella of an actual company.
Did you consider staying a freelancer? Was that ever an option?
I think I had a vision for how I wanted things to go. I saw the new projects growing into some sort of full-time partnership with some of the companies we had done design work for. But unfortunately, I was using a sort of westernized mindset to deal with African clients. And I think that ultimately led to me realizing I couldn't be a freelancer with new projects forever.
What happens next?
Last year, at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, I came to a difficult decision to A, quit my 9-to-5, and then B, sort of consolidate the new project into a different direction.
You still had a 9-to-5 while you were running Nupe Project.
Yeah, you can't survive with just freelancing in Nigeria.
True.
So I had a 9-to-5, a company called AFA Sports, and they're owned by the African Basketball League. So they brought me on board to design their signature sneakers for basketball. So that was my 9-to-5 at the time. I think most of my 9-to-5s, if I'm to be honest, usually run a course of like about a year, because typically with my kind of job, unless the company is churning out products every season, you would be employed on a contract basis, which typically was a year.
Right. And once the product is in the market, then
essentially, yeah,
job's done.
Yeah.
I'm trying to paint a picture here about Nupe Project, and it seems that you were a freelancer while running Nupe Project. You were working 9-to-5 while running Nupe Projects. You brought out what I would say maybe one of your most famous products at Nupe Project, and this was the LNG smart gas meter.
Yeah.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about where you were in that time and how this thing came to exist?
So again, the LNG smart meter or the LPG smart meter came about right before the COVID-19 pandemic. It was our foray into, because typically as a design agency or industrial design agency, you do products for other people when they come to you. So we had this idea to do our own in-house product that we would release, under a subsidiary. And we decided to do LPG because the whole world was shifting towards cleaner energy and clean energy solutions. So we felt, like I said, if you remember earlier, I mentioned one of my passions as an industrial designer was alternative energy, clean energy.
Yeah.
So I saw the perfect opportunity. And I had just come off working on a project for a company called Jazza Energy for a smart solar battery in Tanzania. So I felt, this is something I wanted to do. So we started the project thinking one thing, and then we ended up with a different thing. So what I mean by that, we started the project thinking that what we needed was a smart gas meter. But after testing in the market, we realized that was possibly sort of putting the carriage before the horse. And then, to be completely transparent, when we reverse engineered and found where we needed to be with the product, coronavirus came and sort of killed the viability of the product at that time. Truth be told, another thing it showed us was that African investors are not ready for hardware. There's only so much you can fund with your own money when you have an idea. And especially when it comes to hardware. If you don't have investors, your company is dead in months, literally, because you need to hire staff, you need to there's running costs. So if you can't convince an investor about how good your idea is in the first month of your operations, chances are that either A, you don't have good market fits, or B, you're speaking to the wrong people. And we had both things coming against us. So right now, I'm glad you even brought it up, because the product now has been changed into a sensor, and we're still developing it. But we are sort of keeping things under wraps until we find the right partner to enter the market with.
So for all intents and purposes, this isn't a public project anymore?
No, it's not. For now, it is a project where we need a partner on, and without a partner, I don't think it will ever see daylight.
That said, you got a lot of press coverage for the invention of this smart meter.
Yes.
As I recall, you were in The Guardian, and there was a number of journalists who talked about how this was a very innovative device.
Correct.
Do you think that there is a correlation between, I suppose, the amount of media coverage and the potential for partners that you might have had?
I'm glad you asked that question, because that's one of my biggest problems with Nigeria is follow through. I'm sure you're used to seeing news articles, or when they say things like, some young boy in Jugganut invents water-powered generator, So
yeah,
all these, I like to call them puff pieces.
Puff pieces.
They need them for their ratings.
I'm going to steal that one.
Yeah, they need them for their ratings. They need them for clickbait. But essentially, nothing really ever comes from it, because who are the people watching these news articles or news shows to make the decision to call and say, I'm interested in this, I want to invest money? Very few. I did get a lot of calls, to be honest. And like I said, one of those calls actually led to me taking a trip to Ghana to meeting a potential investor, but the coronavirus and bad market fit made those discussions fall through.
Right.
But I can tell you there's no correlation between at least the Nigerian media and your success. Very little. You are the only one that can take your product to the next level. Media is good, press is good, but you have to do the hard work yourself. No one is going to come off watching a 5-minute news clip and decide they want to give you $100,000 seed investment. So yeah, we learned a lot from that, which is build your products, build your markets. Don't use the press to piggyback the real process and the real steps it takes.
It's extremely important. And I'm really glad that you shared this, because it's one thing really to be covered by the press. And this is one of the reasons why on this show, we're trying to explore the relationship between media and creativity, because you are such a great example of where this happened, and the product was good. The product was innovative, and it was special. It does not exist anywhere else. And yet we find ourselves in a situation where we're asking for more. And so do you think that this situation may have been changed if, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you received a little bit more international media coverage than you originally did?
Yes, definitely. I think if the coverage went outside of the Nigerian media, things might have taken a different path. I 100% agree. I'm not saying the Nigerian media doesn't have that kind of reach, but I think, without sounding like I'm underrating Nigerian media, a lot of the people who watch certain channels, probably don't understand what they're watching, which is why these puff pieces are very, they tend to end where they end after these interviews are done, because it's hard to get behind an LPG device when you are still using kerosene and firewood.
True.
But I mean, if it was something more relatable, I think you would find customers, but when it's something a bit out of reach, sort of like, which is a very famous saying in Nigerian media, is the government needs to come and help, or the big men need to come and support. That's always the end of these types of interviews. They leave it up to somebody with money and influence to be involved. They don't see themselves as being in a position to influence or shift your product to the next level.
That is true. That is absolutely true. So in this situation that we find ourselves, and again, not to disparage the Nigerian media at all, it's just we have a situation where we do not have Nigerian media that's read outside the shores of Nigeria all that much. And we're not receiving as much international coverage. And it's really important for you to have confirmed that, because I'd like to ask you something else. You've collaborated with people internationally. You've worked with people in China, brands that some of us have heard of, some of us have not. But the most important thing is you've met and worked with people who are not Africans, and put it very simply, they gave you money. So there's this idea that African talent doesn't get enough of these types of international collaborations. In your case, what do you think was really the core attraction for you or to your talent?
Let me give you the perfect example. This was the project I referred to with Jazza Energy, the solar power company. So they reached out to me on LinkedIn, believe it or not. They didn't know me from anywhere. They didn't know me from Adam. They sent me a message on LinkedIn, then followed up with a message on my website. And I think eventually now reached me through IGDM when they couldn't reach me on both those means. Now, what they were looking for, because I asked them, why me? Why did you bring this project my way?
Right.
They said they needed an African industrial designer living in Africa. And that was very important for their process. Same thing with Technomobile. When Technomobile reached out to me for a job, it was the same brief. We need an African designer who has an understanding of international design standards, but lives in the continent. Because what I was finding that was actually upsetting me before starting new projects was a lot of the innovative hardware projects being done in Africa were being done by white people. Right. I mean, I have to say that very plainly.
We have to.
And the reason for that is in two parts. One is when companies decided they wanted to make hardware products for Africa, they didn't think there were any industrial designers in the continent to do this. So they would either go to the UK, the US, Ireland, Germany, Sweden to find designers.
Yep.
The second reason is because a lot of these companies, quite honestly, were foreigners coming into Africa. So they were coming with their team. And their team, most of the time, is either 99% or 100% white. And they didn't see a need to include any of the local designers on the project because they felt our design education was not as thorough as theirs. To a point, true. But that exclusion of the African or local mind in a product tends to either lead to something in design that we call improper market fit. So a good example is there's a packaged ice cream company in Nigeria called Fan Milk or Fan Yogo.
Yep.
So they initially came into Africa, and I think they're Danish. They came into Africa thinking that they could sell ice cream the way they sold ice cream in their country, which is, sell it in an ice cream truck or sell it in a store, like these little tiny 7-Elevens. Nigeria had need. I mean, you could do neither in Nigeria because one, your ice cream truck would get stuck in traffic. And then there was not a huge amount of stores in Nigeria at that point in time. that were refrigerated, with refrigeration to hold this thing in place. And they also had a short shelf life, so you couldn't keep it stored for too long. So that's why you see ice cream in Nigeria is being sold on a bicycle. So they realized that they needed to adapt to local, sort of the local landscape. Another good example is the sachet culture is actually a West African invention.
Really?
So a lot of the things that are sold, a lot of things that are sold in sachet in Nigeria were never sold in sachet anywhere in the world. And it was these big sorts of food and beverage powerhouses that started to do that. And they realized that Nigeria is a microeconomy, and they needed to use that same concept for products. So when they first released all these sorts of food and beverages, Milo, all of that, in these huge, big containers, products were not selling. But guess what they noticed? So say a store owner bought a huge tin of Milo from them. The store owner would then repackage it into smaller nylon bags. These companies were like, well, instead of us losing our customers to this sort of smart innovation, and then also people started to complain about infestations with, in the product. But the problem is when the store owner has already opened it, how he maintains it after that is, out of the hands of the company.
The producers, yeah.
Yeah, so they got involved and started to make sachet versions of practically everything from toothpaste to cornflakes to milk to, everything is in sachet format in Nigeria.
Pretty much.
And that is information they will have found if they, had people on ground being involved in their design process and in their development process. And if you see now in Nigeria, the tides have turned. A lot of the upper management positions have taken out the foreigners and put in Nigerians, because Nigerians truly are the only ones that understand Nigeria. So if you're bringing a product into the market, you need local minds to be involved in the process. So I think that's one of my appeals, is sort of this international standard of education and approach, but also a local mind to the problems as they are on ground, and a sort of like insights, special insights to product development.
I think you've summed up the entire African creative industry in just a few minutes. And I have to say that was brilliant, because it goes not just for... It's pretty much everything that's a creative process. Remember, there were in Nigeria, there were Guinness ads that were produced by ad agencies in South Africa, and they were never shot actually in Nigeria for the longest time. Even till this day, there's a Pan-African issue really across the board with people bringing products in, marketing, whatever it is that isn't a fit, because of the same reasons that you've just described. They do not have any local input,
especially at a managerial sort of high position level.
Exactly. No one really calling the shots there to make these kind of decisions happen. This is really just so this question I'm about to ask you is, I think, what a place we might get to that sort of describes this African situation. And maybe you may have some really profound thoughts on this. What would be the next logical step for perhaps your craft, or even African creativity in general, for us to get to the point where we are being brought into the room when things like this happen?
Okay, so to be honest, I used to think I had the answers to these questions, but I think it's in two parts, right? The first part is we need to, as individual creatives, we need to not wait for anyone to employ us to show how well we can do something. Right. And I won't even use myself as an example. I will use someone like Kemi Adetiba. Are you familiar with her work?
I am not.
Okay, so Kemi Adetiba is in the film industry, and is setting herself up to be, one of the contemporaries in Nigerian filmmaking. So I think Kemi Adetiba is a good example of what we need to do. Kemi Adetiba started off her career as a radio presenter and essentially sort of a OAP for different kinds of companies from MTV-based, Sound City, BET, etc. Until the day she decided and put her foot down and said, I want to make my first movie. She's made only 2 movies. One is called The Wedding Party. The second is called King of Boys.
Oh, I know these movies.
Yeah, and she's also worked on other people's movies as either a director or a producer. But these 2 movies are her movies. And she's also done music videos. She's done she's done ads, all kinds of things. And I think, when you watch her movies, you watch her attention to detail. You see that shift. I mean, you see the Nigerian element in, what is considered a Nigerian movie, but you see that shift away from improper techniques. For example, Nigerian movies in the past would shoot the whole entire thing in 1 week. And this is not a joke, literally. And what happens when you shoot a movie in a week is you don't redo shots. You don't, when a boom mic is in the scene, you don't say, let's shoot that scene again and that boom mic can be there. When somebody makes a mistake, you don't, because essentially there's a tight budget. You need to get the movie rolled out as quickly as possible. And back then, movies were being sold in a very different way from the way they are now. We have a new system as creatives, and even just generally in the world. The world is literally born again, especially for us in Nigeria. We are having the opportunity to go from having Africa Magic to Netflix Africa and, Iroko TV and Instagram, YouTube. There's the dynamics have changed. But what I'm noticing isn't changing is people's approach to their work. And that's step number 1. We are now a global village.
Yep.
If the top movie for 2019 is a Korean movie, why can't the top movie for 2021 be a Nigerian movie? The difference, to me, is production quality. It is not even the language you're speaking. It is not the color of the skin of the actors in the movie. It is approach. So number 1 is we need a different approach as creatives ourselves. We need to give it our 100%. And if you can't give a project 100%, don't put it out there.
This is true.
Because you shouldn't be expecting, any different results from people that have done it the same way in the past. The second thing, which is the biggest problem in Nigeria and what has led to a lot of brain drain, is lack of support and infrastructure. And this cuts across bad governance, yes, but it also cuts across lack of investment from our people in our people. And I think that's as far as I'll go on that second topic, because it can drag on forever. But that second point. We know the problem. Yeah, we know the problem. Yeah.
We do. And if anyone really wants to know, there's only a Google search away, really, from majority of the issues that Nigeria faces, as well as so many African countries. So we're coming to the end of this show, and just really before I close off with you, there's some things I would really like to know. And we're going to turn this back to you and then maybe back to the African scene. But first, on your side, what's next for Nupe Project and you?
Okay. So what's next for me? Well, the coronavirus situation made me come to 2 realizations. The first was I needed to take one of my ideas and bring it to market. And second was I needed to do it from the diaspora. What's next for us at this moment is we want to release a footwear product into the market. Starting from that point and then letting it evolve naturally into a brand, athleisure brand, product brand. Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing that come alive. Back to Africa. What's something you can get with African people that you can't get anywhere else?
I think one of our strongest points is the fact that we have been given nothing in terms of like external support, and we've made a lot out of that, out of that nothingness, especially our generation, millennials and Gen Z. Even though we like to fight ourselves, we are fortunate to be in a position to be able to say, I can be a musician in a country that doesn't even have a proper, music industry or proper record labels. You have a country now that is responsible for most of the tech investments in Africa, and that's coming from a country that doesn't even have 4G internet, So our resilience, honestly, it's commendable. We are the generation of not managing. We actually want things to be done properly. Our parents' generation was manage, suffer and smile. We are, suffer, smile, but do something about it. And that's, honestly, it's unheard of in really anywhere in the world. And that's why I think we excel so well when we are outside Nigeria, because we go above and beyond, because that's what we've been doing from birth.
So profound. Thank you so much, Funfere.
You're welcome.
This has really been a learning experience for me. Your insight into product design, product development, and the African creativity scene is definitely unique, and I appreciate you for sharing that with us.
Not a problem.
Where can we keep up with you?
So right now, the best place is my personal IG handle, which is @Funfere Koroye. And then, any other updates would be taken from there.
Thank you for joining us on the Bantu podcast. We'll have Funfere's handle in the show notes and all other links. Please be sure to check it out. And thank you for being a part of this production.
Thank you.
Our guest this week was Funfere Koroye. Follow him on Instagram to keep up with him and his company, Nupe Project. This episode was written and produced by me, Adetunji Paul. Our music was produced by Jugganut and Darko Beats. Bantu, the African Creative Podcast, is a project of Studio Black. We're on Instagram at Studio BLVCK, on Twitter at Studio BLVCK_, and you can visit our website, studioblvck.com, for more information about the show. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye from everywhere.